So Foresight biases, aha moments, and the next Michael Porter. In these 20 minutes, I will try my best to convince you that these three things are connected. I'll start with Foresight biases. If you look at the public opinion and public intellectuals and business commentators, they're all about the future, the single future. And this is probably the ring that rules them all. It's probably the Foresight biases that governs others. And why I'm starting from this point is because executives do not really read the Academy of Management Review. It's because they follow public intellectuals, they follow business commentators. So that's where I'm starting from this. And the major Foresight bias of all is the single future. And alternative futures is the title of this event. But actually, if you look at the public opinion, nobody talks about alternative futures. They just look at the single future. So this happens in many different ways. Mostly it happens in two ways. One way is the techno-optimists. The techno-optimists on the left, they think that as long as you have some technology, you can solve everything. And I think this is a bit of a deus ex machina. You know, have you ever watched those movies where everything is solved all of a sudden, and you really cannot really add up to why that is the case? That is the techno-optimist. And the one on the right is the Cassandras. The Cassandras are basically a form of intellectual look at me. They look at the future and they use sensationalism to say, hey, this is not a future we want. This is doomsday. And when these two kinds of business commentators are criticized because their projections of the future is limited, they just say, hey, that was one only scenario. I was trying to show one possible way that the future would go. And I think that is a rather glib response in face of the multiplicity of alternative futures. So that is the Foresight bias that governs them all. The problem with this big Foresight bias is that how does this reflect to executives? Well, executives do design their strategy thinking that the future will be doomsday, that the future will be AI control. Maybe not so excessive, but they will think that the future is going into that direction that they hear from the podcast, into that direction that they hear from the business commentator. So they design their strategy to crack that holy grail within that future that they really believe in. So that's why this is really a problem for executives. But the reality is that the future is not going to be that simple. As Bruce Sterling famously said, you can read this on your own, neither best case scenarios nor worst case scenarios ever happen in the real world. What happens in the real world is always a sideways case scenario. I love the sideways case scenario. So utopias, dystopias, forget that. The future is always more complex than that. There is an economist, an American economist, his name is Thomas Sowell. He talks about policies. And he says that policies are neither good or bad. There is never a good policy. There is never a bad policy. There are always trade-offs. And I think this really applies to futures as well. In futures, there is always a trade-off. Some people gain from a scenario. Some people lose from a scenario. It's always like that. That is just the reality of the situation. So the Cassandras and the techno-optimists, they're quite limited. Now, if you wanted to dig deep in why that is the case, I probably think it's because of emotions. It goes back to the topic that Mark was talking about. And what I mean by that is the projection of emotions into the future. So during the pandemic, we had people saying, oh my God, the future is going to be virtual for the next 30 years. And that's fear. That is not foresight. And recently, with the AI hype, we had people talking about machines. It's like they're trying to remind us of the doomsday that we see in the science fiction movies. But if you have ever asked anything ChatGPT, it's a different story. And there is another very famous public intellectual, I don't want to name anybody, but he talks about AI as an amoeba right now. He says the evolutionary curve is very quick. It's going to become a dinosaur. Imagine when it's becoming a dinosaur, if it's so powerful when it's an amoeba. So all these are emotions that are projected into the future. And that's not really foresight. That's usually fear. So I think this future emotion slide is, I think it's another bias on its own, but you can think about this as embedded within the single future bias. It's embedded, it's the same thing. And executives follow these emotions. Another bias very much perpetuated by the public discourse is the trends reports bias. So when you hear about trends reports, it's like a panacea, right? It's like magic. Executives sit down with their organization, they drink that elixir of the trend report, and they're like, ta-da, future-proof man. Doesn't happen. Trend reports are actually a poison. They're a poison because what happens with trends is that you are expanding current phenomena of the present. You're expanding current events of the present. You're expanding public figures of the present into the future. So trends reports are a continuation and an expansion. They're just an expansion of the present. They're not the future at all. And executives drink that poison, by the way. A trend is a friend until it bends, adds Seikoda. So the story of the chicken comes to mind. The story of the chicken. There is a chicken, and it gets fed by its owner every day. And the chicken thinks the future is going to be very bright. It gets fed every day. Beautiful, beautiful life. Simple, lay back. Until at some point, the owner kills the chicken to serve it for dinner. And obviously, the trend did not occur. So that is the story of Trends Report, ladies and gentlemen. That's the story of the chicken. It's not a good story. It's not fun. It's not nice. So the reality of trends is that trends have a weight. They have a weight. There's always a force that rows against the development of a trend. For example, sustainability is a great trend. Values towards sustainability, everybody is very concerned about sustainability right now. But your grandma is not going to divide her trash in 7 different bins. That's just the reality of the situation. Working from home, huge trend. Everybody can work from home from very exotic locations. Well, it turns out that's not the case. Actually, mega cities have never been so powerful. They are bigger and bigger and bigger because what happens with remote technology is that you work on the suburbs of the city remotely, and then you will commute to the city once a week, right? So working from exotic locations, what? Mega cities have never been so powerful. And well, AI, generative AI, robotics, huge trend, huge hype in the past year. But turns out very few companies are using it. There was a report by The Economist, 5% of American companies are using AI, generative AI. So, yeah, if you have ever asked ChatGPT anything, you know why, right? So the future is not represented by trends. It is better represented by what the Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies says. It's a friction field. So a friction field, right? You get trends on one hand pushing towards the future, and then you have a force against the trends. So you have this like tectonic plates. That's the future. That's not trends. So executive, by the way, they think about the futures through trends. You see the issue here. And finally, this is the most annoying of all, is when one element about the future is changed by the public opinion, and everything else stays the same. So this picture is a famous picture, actually, a couple of decades ago. And it shows a service robot with somebody who reads newspapers without realizing that when we will really have service robots, we will not have newspapers. But obviously, this is very common today in many other things. Think about self-driving cars. So we are very concerned about the safety issue of self-driving cars. But the reality is that when we will really have self-driving cars, we will not have roads anymore. Right? And what's another one? Yeah, we're really concerned about the impact of very long lifespans on our careers. There's a huge hype on that, but we don't realize that when we will really have the technology to make us live 200s, 300s, 400 years, most likely we will not have careers. Just to wrap up, these are the biases that executives digest, and they live in this fog. They live in this fog of complete misguided approach towards the future that they digest from public intellectuals, from business commentators, from the public discourse. So what's the solution? My suggestion is the solution is in aha moments. So why that is the case? I had a mentor. He was my first scenario planning mentor. His name is Clement Wang. He's a tall Chinese Canadian gentleman, very gentle, gracious guy. And he used to teach the scenario planning executive MBA at NUS Business School for 25 years. And I was there. I had the privilege to be a coach in his classes. And once he told me, Alex, you see that executives in the back row over there? You see these executives like this. He says, Alex, that executive is having a aha moment. You see, when he bring his fist to the forehead, when they bring their hands to the forehead, but especially the fist, that executive is learning, is having a aha moment. That is the moment when the executive has learned that everything is done beforehand is trash, or has to be reevaluated. So then I had a aha moment. I was like, that's how executive learns. They do not learn by reading the Academy of Management Review. And by Academy of Management Review, I mean all the journals we have. They don't learn like that. So what's an aha moment? What do you say to this? Anybody? What's the solution to this? You got a solution? You don't understand the question. So try to say this in your head. So read it and then say it in your head. Let me say it aloud for you. Okay. There are 30 cows and 28 chickens in the field. How many didn't? Wait, let me repeat. There are 30 cows and 28 chicken in the field. So some of you are starting to get it. There are 30 cows and 20 of them ate chicken. So usually that moment when you go like is a moment. Another one. This is a really tough one. And this is a koan. And some people try to answer this, and they try to do this. Because obviously the sound of two hands is this. But the sound of one hand is a bit more dodgy. So they go like this. Maybe that, right? Turns out that's not the solution. The solution is there is no answer to this. This koan, like many other koans, has been designed. It has been designed to make you understand there are things you do not know. And there are pretty, I would say, dramatic accounts of people getting awakened by aha moments like this, by koans like this. So if you actually feel what is this koan about, you will have a pretty strong awakening. And I think I wanted to bring up these two examples because when you learn through things like this, when you learn through aha moments, you learn by feeling. It goes back to emotions. You learn by feeling, not by reading the Academy of Management Review. You learn by feeling, not with the logic mind. And all the research we have been done is about the logic mind. So I fear that when we start doing research about the future, we will really continue to leverage the logic mind, but I hope we don't. So this is really relevant for executives. There is a very interesting theory and story that Henry Mintzberg talks about, which is very connected to this. Henry Mintzberg says that the strategy of an executive doesn't come by sitting at their desk. It comes after synthesis of past experience, especially after synthesis of serendipitous, that's how I call it, serendipitous experience in the past. As serendipitous equals to aha moments. So that's what we're really interested in emergent strategy. That's what it says. Strategists think about the past and then they will design their strategy based on synthesis of experience, based on aha moments. It brings the example of IKEA. So IKEA did not know that they would have their customers assemble furniture on their own until an employee wanted to bring home a table, and they had to fit the table in the van. The table did not fit, so he had to cut the legs of the table. And so the strategist thought, aha, that is when we should go. If the employee is doing this, we should do it too. We should cut the tables so that the customers will assemble stuff on their own. Aha moment. Strategy is defined. Winning strategy is defined. So that's how we should do research about the futures. Because, very famous quote, Bachner, they may forget what you said, they will never forget how you made them feel. So I'm trying to relay the fact we really need to break from the hypothetical deductive reasoning that management research has been all about, especially when we are doing stuff about alternative futures. So the last part, based on all this rambling, I hope it doesn't sound so vague for the rigor, for the systematic mind that you have as a management researcher. I really hope it doesn't. If it does, hopefully you can read this as not naivete, but informed naivete, if I may. So what's the next step? How do you become the next Michael Porter? And by that I mean, how do you become as influential and as the next Michael Porter for management research about alternative futures? And my last guide on that is, you don't want to become the next Michael Porter. You want to become as influential as him, sure, but not in the same manner. And hopefully the stuff I've said, which is again not prescriptive, the stuff I said will at least encourage you to start thinking about awakening the not logic, not hypothetical deductive mind of executives, because they do not read. Executives do not read the Academy of Management Review. To do that, we need to be ambitious. I'm closing up with an ambitious quote. Peter Diamandis, very successful entrepreneur, he says, that EU will invest in startups that can solve a billion people problem. That is criterion to invest in startups. And I think, why are we not so ambitious? Why are we not ambitious at all? So why are we not thinking about investing in research that can solve a billion manager problems? That is all. And I think we shall do that soon.